Hi everyone, nice to have you here on this podcast, A Grade in a Pearl Shell, where we dive into the thoughts of students, the experiences of parents, to look for those pearls of wisdom that will help us all navigate our situations at school better, whether they be academic, whether they be social, whether they be to do with note taking specifically or motivation. It's all about listening to the struggles that you faced as parents or as students at school and having the conversation and hopefully helping others who can listen in on our conversations and the solutions that you found. I hope it's an extremely valuable thing. Just to introduce myself now, I'll be your host, Chetan Bhatt. I'm a science tutor, and these initial conversations will be had with some amazing people, people I've seen grow, my students, and people I'm very proud of. So the first one is Jasper Brown. He's started reading psychology at a university in Amsterdam, and he has a lot of interesting insight into how to overcome boredom and maintain motivation while studying subjects that you're not sure about, how to find interest, how to choose your subjects at university, and how to overcome procrastination. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Jasper and this first podcast. Thank you for being here, and let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you think we missed anything, and let me know if it helped. So yes, without further ado, let's begin.
Hello, guys.
Hi Jasper. Hi Jasper.
Hi,
Nice
Chetan.
to see you. It's been a
Nice to see you.
summer, and now you're at university. So I don't know if you want me to introduce you from my perspective, but so I believe I started teaching you when you were 9, 10 years old. 11 plus entry to Mill Hill School, and at that time, I remember coming back to one of the places you stayed at that time, and you had some gallium, which you had bought off Amazon. And gallium is a really interesting substance because it melts at like kind of body temperature. So you're melting it in your hands and stuff like that. And you're very much into building things and making things. So it's no surprise to me that over the years, I think I taught you until you're like 16, 17, maths and science, and very interested in how things work, very analytical, loved history, and now you're studying psychology, how the mind works. So pretty, oh, I just to say that, well done, I'm impressed. It's been a great journey teaching you. So that's Jasper from my perspective, but why don't you introduce yourself to Jasper? Like maybe what you're doing now, why you chose what you're doing now, and perhaps any other details about your background that you think are relevant. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Jasper, a long-time ex-student of Chetan Bhatt, the best tutor in the world. It was my brother who initially was being tutored by Chetan and by yourself, and I was always curious. I was always asking the question more to you because I as you said, you thought I was always curious as when I was younger, and I've always been very curious, and I was very convinced about the sciences when I was 13 for my 13 plus. I really enjoyed them, but then that declined a bit, and I started to pick up history more as a favorite subject.
Yeah.
But it was a weird time trying to pick my course for university. I applied to the UK for history. I had a very hard time writing a personal statement for my history, and I was in the process of also doing my history coursework for my A-levels, which made me change my mind about my decision to study history in the UK. And I started to look overseas, the options to apply to universities overseas. And I looked at the Netherlands because of the geographical proximity to England, which made things easier. And so, and what was my motivation?
So actually, I think this is really interesting what you're talking about here, because at some point you had a change in your interest. You pursued that change in interest whilst you're at school. These are really hard decisions students have to make when they're about 14, 15, and they have to pick their GCSEs and their A levels and kind of look forward in, basically a third of their life, right? They're 14, 15, they have to look forward for the next 5 years and they're trying to understand what they were doing, what they want to do. You chose history, you were passionate about it. But whilst you were doing your coursework, you realized that this wasn't for you. So what was it about that made you realize it wasn't for you? And then what was it about psychology that made you realize, in that moment, that is something more for you? Because I think a lot of other students would think that their decisions are final and they put a lot of pressure on themselves. But of course, you've managed to navigate the situation quite successfully.
I mean, I'm not sure how well I managed to navigate the situation successfully, but I'll care to explain my thought process throughout my A levels of what I was possibly considering or doing. Initially, I thought economics could be a very good choice at university. That declined as well, realizing that my interest in economics was just, I guess, as a hobby, not actually as a subject. And then I started to look into law because I was, I'm able to read all right. I can read fast and all of that. And I thought maybe that was a good option, but that declined as well. And then I looked onto history and I was really fixed on history for quite a while, but then this coursework, and the thing that made me decide that history wasn't for me is doing coursework, which is something that I've been told by my history teachers is something that you do almost every 2 weeks at university. You write like a paper like that every 2 weeks. But history, well, from my perspective, is just reading another historian's interpretation and just putting it back onto paper. You have no input of yourself. Okay. It's constantly comparing historians, and
that's something that you wanted to do, something where you're able to research more independently into a question. But actually, it's an interesting one. I wonder if you get a historian student about your age on and have that conversation, because I'm sure at some point, at some new frontier of history, it's different. But I guess I don't know the subject so well. So it's interesting that you felt that way, and then that's why you moved towards psychology. So interesting. Okay, so why did psychology not decline? What was it about psychology that kept you hooked?
Quite honestly, the thing with psychology is I took it as an A level, and honestly, initially in year 12, when I picked it as an A level, the first 3 months of psychology, I hated it. I really wanted to switch it to politics. For 3 months, I wanted to switch it to politics, but I persevered. But then I started doing my own reading, not just the syllabus reading in psychology. And I started to realize it's not like that. It's a science that's continuously trying to prove itself. It's not like a biology or chemistry or physics, which is already well established. It's a science which is continuously trying to prove itself, because the study of the human mind is a very subjective one. And that's what fascinated me about psychology.
It's very much a frontier, yes. I mean, I guess you do have that. That's interesting to say subjective, because you have the neurological side, which is very much like hard science, hard biology, and then you have the whole consciousness side, which is a whole crazy frontier for all of us in the sciences. Whether you're in computing, whether you're in trying to interpret what consciousness is from as a subjective experience of all these material realities. Very, very interesting that's what attracted you. So that's really, really cool, Jasper. I think there's a few things in your story that will be very, very useful for us to understand more about. First is, why did you decide to persevere with psychology rather than just switch to politics? Because that seems to have been an easier path. What made you persevere?
Well, to be honest, my perseverance, it's not a very remarkable story. It's a very studenty story. I was too afraid to catch up for the politics syllabus. after already a month and a half in. And so it's nothing fascinating, but I was too afraid to catch up with the syllabus that I'd missed.
But it's very practical. It makes a lot of sense. And when you say persevere, what did that entail? Like, what did that look like? Were you finding it boring and had to kind of motivate yourself, or what did persevering look like for you?
Perseverance meant doing your assignments, doing them on time, trying to be attentive in class to actually learn something, even though it's something which was strongly not connecting with me as a subject for the first 3 or 4 months in school. And then that's what perseverance looked like. It's not a very again, it's not a very remarkable story. It's just one of a student.
Perseverance it looks like a grind, and it's good when we show it is for exactly what it is. But what becomes interesting about that story again is that it was a subject that wasn't connecting with you. You knew you had to complete it, so you knew that was something that you had to do. There wasn't another option. So you had to force yourself to be attentive in class to learn. But none of those things right now indicate a reason as to why you take an interest, why you do your own reading around the subject. So what marked the transition to doing your own reading?
To be honest, the transition, I guess it was because of situational factors, and to a big part of it, like many conversations in the last 2 years, it was related to the pandemic and starting to spend time at home.
Okay, so you had more time.
It was, I guess it was also an experience of personal growth, because for me, the first lockdown in the spring of 2020, it was a very personally tough experience of personal growth and trying to mature. And with that, I started to get into mindfulness, and it was maybe YouTube clips which would get me interested on literature that was mentioned in these YouTube clips. And then I would start to read around that literature, and then I actually got into the literature.
Okay. So do I have this correct? So it's certainly partly due to the pandemic. You had a little bit more time, but you also had quite a lot more to manage, and you needed to somehow get past that. And so you started looking towards places with this kind of information that will help you manage whatever kind of stress the pandemic imposed. And that happened to be psychology, a subject that you were studying. And then that's when it connected. That's when it connected, and you started reading around it and into it. So then when you started reading the literature, what kinds of things were you reading? Was it like, did you start off light, or did you dive into the deep end with whatever book was suggested?
I know initially it was more philosophical things, really. It wasn't very psychologically related, but it was more philosophical things. I remember something that, I don't know, it was this merged interest between politics, history, anthropology, psychology, and philosophy. It was this mix. I was finding a lot more about the past, but not only in a historical way, but also in a psychological and anthropological way, which I found very interesting. But the first actual text that I started to read around was Jung's Red Book.
Okay, very nice. Started with Jung. That's a very cool place to start. Very interesting place to start. I know.
Yeah, it was one of those.
It
was one of those the summary books. It wasn't actually Jung's Red Book, because such texts back then they seemed immense to me. They seemed overwhelming.
I think this is really cool advice, actually, for anyone that's listening and who wants to get into a subject, is to read the summary books. My interest in this conversation would push me towards asking you about what you discovered in Jung's writing. But I think we should reserve that to the conversation afterwards, because what I would like to hear now is that, having gone through that journey yourself, is there any advice that you give to a student who's struggling with a subject because they find it's boring, or yeah, well, yeah, let's stick to that.
To answer your question, that from my experience, I think boredom really it comes around when you hit a bit of a wall in your subject, when you start to feel confused about your subject, when you start to get into when you start to realize your subject's getting a bit hard, and so you start to neglect the subject a bit, and that's when boredom arrives. So the best advice I can give to overcome boredom is to try find any method, YouTube videos or Wikipedia or anything, to try simplify that topic as much as possible, to break it down into very small steps. So from my experience, as summarizing it, boredom comes from neglect of the subject because it starts to get hard. I wouldn't mind adding,
Yeah.
I just realized it myself, and you said when a subject gets harder, like even at A levels or university, you can't try to making it fun isn't really an option. But with me, my experience at A levels was that the perseverance helped in A levels when you reach a breaking point in your subtopics in your study, when you have a revelation about how something works, and it's very it feels good when you have a breakthrough about something new and you feel satisfied. It's not exactly happiness, but it feels like a big breakthrough because you found out something new. Because you chose your topic, it must mean you like your topic in one way or another. And when you persevere enough to make a breakthrough, that's what you look forward to in your subject.
Exactly. What you're talking about is the pleasure you get after perseverance, after you drive in that effort, and then you make that breakthrough. That is a fantastic feeling, and that is a feeling of progress, and that's a great motivator. That kind of feeling of fun makes you want to work more. The other kind of fun is just to make things like just to expect that it shouldn't be hard in the first place. But what you're talking about is actually doing the hard work and then receiving the reward that comes with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a great association to make. So I just want anyone listening, I guess, to and if you're going through that slump in your studies at school, when you go to the YouTubes, it's about finding a simpler explanations to make the subject more manageable. But at the end of the day, you're going to feel that reward, that motivation, after you put in the hard work to make that breakthrough with the subject. And that's when it will really start rolling for you. That's my perspective. But actually, do you share that? Is that what you were effectively?
Something I'd like to also express to the people listening is that I'll be honest and say I'm a very big procrastinator. And I think Cheetah knows that above all people, that I like to procrastinate a lot. But something that helped me persevere is when the few hours I did work, I studied really hard. I didn't take them laid back. So I guess a piece of advice, of course, everyone's different, but what seemed to work for me is you have your own time, but when you work hard, you have the sufficient breaks. And it's about finding a balance between discipline and being good to yourself as well.
Yeah, that's very wise, Jasper. I think that's very wise. Yeah, exactly. When we talk about hard work, we're not just talking about running yourself into the ground. It's about finding that balance and then receiving that reward. And if the reward will come, I think you've got an amazing story there. The next sub question was going to be, how do you work the subject best for you? So you normally have textbooks when you're at school. You know you have an exam that you're running towards. How did you approach taking notes and learning? And then how did you approach the exam? Was there any particular way that you discovered worked best for you?
My best advice,
Yep.
well, honestly, I think any advice I give about studying for exams would make anybody else fail.
Okay.
Okay, I'll give the advice because maybe it might work for some people, but it's something since I've had. It's something I've had since I was 11 or 12, where I'd basically rewrite my textbook in notes.
Okay.
As long as you form your personal association to what's written in the textbooks by writing it, you create the memory association, and that's how you remember. It's a very hard and draining process, but that's how it works. For me, at least in my experience, that's how it worked for me. Of course, there are all these research findings about how there's the graph, right, and how if you plan it 8 weeks in advance and you do if let's say you have 8 subtopics and you do a subtopic every other day for 8 weeks in a row, it will reinforce your memory a lot more. I guess that works as well.
Yeah, there's that I think that's the forgetting curve, where if you learn something and then keep on reminding yourself of it like every hour or every day, actually your memory doesn't get reinforced, because at no point does your brain require to hold on to it, because you're going to remind yourself of it in a very short period of time. So you have to allow yourself to forget a little bit and then go back to it, triggering your mind to force the memory to the surface. And then that's what drives the neurons closer together and makes that memory stick. So I think that's the long-term vision. If you're learning something, to know there's a forgetting curve, and make sure that you're reminding yourself at intervals. Yeah.
So the advice to any listener out there, revision is not an easy process. It's very tedious, it's very long. But if you do follow this way of revision, if it personally fits into you as well, you do a big batch of notes at the end of your subtopic, and then when it's coming up towards an exam, an end of year exam, or even your actual A-levels or GCSEs, you go through these notes and you rewrite them in a more brief and concise way to refresh your mind even more.
Which actually is a really interesting point. So when you're writing the notes down, would you modify them from the textbook? Would they
Yes. The most important, very important way, unless it's a subject from my experience, like economics, where you have to, with the beginning of an essay, you have to be definition perfect. You have to go through maybe a very painful task of remembering word perfect definitions for certain subjects, but apart from that, maybe certain concepts, it would be best to internalize them yourself and then explain it how you best understand it in your own words. I'd like to butt in and maybe mention how to stress the importance of past papers.
Yeah,
I would. It just came into my head now when talking about revision, and I would really stress the importance of past papers, because it gets you used to how the layout of exams and the type of questions and the type of wordings that you get.
And I think to add to that, it also probes you for the things that you don't know, because when you rely on yourself to ascertain whether you know a subject or not, oftentimes you might over-evaluate yourself, like, I know it well. But if a test starts probing you, you start to realize the gaps that you have. You can fill in those gaps with the masking, which is literally the way that you have to write it in the exam. And that creates a very, very strong way to remember information, and the correct information too, and fix your weaknesses. So I guess so far we've spoken about your kind of journey at school, the way you came to choose psychology, how you found perseverance in your subject, that I think students should get from that if you persevere, there's a reward at the end, and that's where the real fun starts. Don't try and look to make the subject easier necessarily, or at the beginning, just try and persevere and work through the subject until you find success. It will come. We spoke about how you approach exams, how you take notes, how you reinforce your memory and your revision. But I think now that you're at university, we can talk about what's happening now and looking forward. So, what are you enjoying most about university? What are you looking forward to? Of course, everyone's plans change as we mature and as we work through things. So currently, what are you looking forward to at university and doing in the future?
Well, currently at university, it's fun, I've got to say. The social aspect personally has been very fun, but it was a very big shock coming to university, and the workload and the independence and the personal management of things, because it's not like having A levels. People don't chase you. If you don't do it, it's your own fault.
Yeah.
You get your grades. You get your grades penalized. You have to find and do everything yourself. You have to create more of a structure, because in my course the lectures are pre-recorded, and you get, I guess, with me, my experience these last 3 weeks is that the first week I got very lazy. I kept procrastinating about it, and then I got overwhelmed by the workload. But I'm not saying that the workload is small either. That I, on average per week, for studying psychology, I have about 220 pages to read, with 6 hours of lectures.
Wow.
And 3 hours of tutorial, plus writing all of my notes.
Yes.
And doing the assignments.
Wow. That's a lot. So, like, with that kind of workload that is coming up, that's what makes a lot of people procrastinate. And you spoke earlier about being prone to procrastination. As we all are, I'll admit to that too. But we all have found ways, I guess, of getting through it. So, what's your way of getting through the procrastination and getting those good hours of work in?
For example, this week, it wasn't a very healthy routine, but not crammed, that's a very bad way of putting it, but I forced myself to do all of my week's assignments, lectures, and reading in 3 days. I started on Monday and finished on Wednesday, and I did about 8 to 9 hours each day.
That's a lot.
Of reading, and additionally to that, watching lectures. So I worked all throughout the day.
And the deadline wasn't Wednesday. The deadline was...
No, but I wanted to enjoy the freedom of my tutorials and interacting with people this weekend.
Okay, well, there we have it. I think, Jasper, you have discovered a great way of finding that effort reward balance in life, and know how to anticipate the reward that comes with effort, and it's making you do some amazing things, like getting your assignments done early so that you can enjoy the weekend, getting you through hard patches in your studies and your work. And I'm sure that it's going to support you throughout many things in life.
If I could add something else quickly, my best advice throughout if you're listening and you're at A levels right now, or you're just about to start A levels, spend your time being as adventurous as possible as you can possibly be throughout these 2 years before your university selection, to see whatever you think is compatible with you, because once you're at university and you've chosen a choice, you have to tell yourself that you've chosen this because you like it and you want to progress in this, and you haven't chosen it just because it's something that you were good at in A levels. Because at university, you're gonna lose motivation for the subject if it's just something you're purely good at. It's something which you won't be able to see a long run goal for why you chose this, and you're gonna start to get thoughts about dropping out, and they can get very severe if a subject's hard and you don't know why you've chosen the subject for yourself.
Very good, very good. Actually, Jasper, I think this marks a great place to begin a part 2, and I will get back in touch with you for the part 2, which is all about selecting your subject, which is about knowing what to expect and anticipate when you're at university, because you've hopefully been there for a little while, what you've experienced. And I think things like what you're saying now about how to, a lot of students worry about that when they're applying to university. If it's hard, will I be able to do it? And they even have these thoughts about dropping out before they even enter the course, because they don't believe that they'll be able to overcome the difficulty. And additionally, practical ways to explore your subjects at A-level, I think, is an interesting one, right? Because students are busy, and to explore and practical ways to explore, which subject is for you is something that would be a really interesting thing to talk about. So thanks so much, Jasper, for coming on this podcast, episode 1. It's really good to see you. It's really good to see and hear how far you've come. And I think the things that you have to say are wise, and I'm proud of that. And I hope that it goes on to help provide some ideas and maybe new thoughts to people who are going through school and who are struggling with similar things, particularly motivation whilst they're studying their subject. I hope to have you back on, and I'm really, really glad that we're staying in touch whilst you're at uni. Your journey there is going to be a really, really great adventure. It'll be really interesting to keep up with how you're doing and new things that you're discovering academically, because you're studying a subject that I think is very, very fascinating, and also in general too, any study tips and advice and stuff like that. So yeah.
Thank you very much for having me on your podcast, Jitan. It was a pleasure to come here and talk to your viewers.
Okay.
And I'll very gladly come on again. Thank you very much.
I hope so. I hope to have you back, hopefully next month. See how you do. Okay. Thanks, Jasper.
Okay. Thanks, Jitan. Bye. Have a good one.
Bye, you too.